Welcome to Day 19 of Western Civilization. Our focus today is going to examine the Seven Years' War. Now, some notable dates to keep in mind are going to be 1756 CE, which is the start of the Seven Years' War, and 1763, which is the Treaty of Paris. Now, the origins for the Seven Years' War spawned from commercial and political competition in both Eastern and Western hemispheres. And so this is originally going to start with competition between European countries themselves. What you'll see eventually is the emergence of Great Britain and France, and they're going to compete with one another to gain footholds for military and merchant influence in different regions of the world. Now, the Seven Years' War is the first true global war, and Winston Churchill himself recognizes the Seven Years' War as a world war itself, before we actually have World War I. So what do we see here? What's going on? In Europe, Britain and Prussia fought against France, Austria, and Russia. And how it starts is Britain declares war on France, and we'll talk about how that happens here in just a moment. Now, in Europe, Prussia is doing the majority of the land-based fighting. Because Britain is separated from the European continent, they are able to kind of focus their attention in other locations around the world, in North America and the Caribbean and India. Now, in North America, this conflict is going to be known as the French and Indian War. These essentially are the enemies that fought against the British in this conflict. Now, the Seven Years' War is generally referred to as the Great War for Empire, and what it's going to do is it's going to lay the foundation for about 150 years of British imperial hegemony. Basically, they're going to grow and expand their influence worldwide, and they will become the world leader. So if you take a look, a lot of times Great Britain justifies their means to spread their influence because they see themselves as spreading civilization to the barbaric world. Now, oftentimes when they do this, there is going to be some definite bias with British civilization, and so a lot of the native and cultural influences are strongly subdued, so that native populations, or quote-unquote barbaric populations, will assimilate into a Western civilized society, so to speak. So the British Empire at this time was huge, and if you take a look at this map, feel free really to pause this and get into this a little more thoroughly. But you can see Britain here with its main hold, but then everything in pink around here, Britain would have had a significant presence. So you can see the British Empire was a worldwide empire. Now, the Seven Years' War is a combination of various wars, the French and Indian, King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War, so on and so forth. Well, essentially what we're going to see is rivalries in Europe that spill over into colonies around the world. Here are some of the battlefields of the Seven Years' War, and you can see a lot of times where we're going to have conflict is when we have different regions that have spheres of influence that interact with one another. Okay, so the French and Indian War as part of the Seven Years' War in North America, that's going to be a major battlefield. The European continent is going to be a major battlefield as well, in India as well. So 3 different theaters. We will talk primarily in this class about what happens here in North America. Again, here's just another map of locations where there's conflict and where it's happening. A closer examination looking at Central Europe, Prussia, again, fighting against some of the allies of Austria, France, Russia, Sweden, Saxony, and Spain, and so on and so forth. So what we can see from this conflict is that Prussia is somewhat, so to speak, on an island against all these allies. And eventually what that's going to do is that's going to reduce Prussia's influence in this area. Okay? Great Britain, again, you can see this. They, for the most part, are isolated from the continent and therefore are not subject to invasions and military land-based conflicts like what Prussia is going to experience. Like we talked about in North America, there's going to be some major conflicts, and this is kind of what North America looks like around the mid-1700s. Now, as you can see, France controls the majority of North America, more so than England. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, is that a lot of what France occupies here are going to be fort settlements, fur trade posts, stuff like that in this region of New France. Okay? Whereas the colonies, this is going to be more of a developed, more dense population, and so there's going to be more technology and stuff here that's going to be beneficial as this period or this area of the United States, or excuse me, the colonies grow. They're going to easily be able to take over and move westward. So again, you can see New France. You can see the English colonies. Over time, this is going to be some of the territorial claims that different monarchies have. So the French, you can see anything in blue here. Okay, anything in green is going to be Spanish claims, and the red are going to be British claims. And this is about 1766 when this happens. Alright, so again, I just want to draw your attention quick to the European theater, and if you take a look here, you can see Prussia, alright, and the Austrian Empire, and just looking at how fragmented Prussia is and how they're going to struggle to defend themselves against some of the European allies against them in Britain. So that was the European theater. Here's the non-European theater. Again, feel free to pause this. I just want to show you a little closer examination, not only of North America, but also what happens here in the Caribbean and also in India as well. So in terms of territory, as we know, the 7 Years' War was primarily fought for an expansion of territory to gain more trade networks, to have more wealth eventually. The North American continent is going to be a huge acquisition of land for the victor of this conflict, which in this case is going to be Great Britain. So even though these are notable sugar colonies and trading outposts and stuff like that on these regions, this is where the majority of the money is going to take place eventually. Now, like we talked about, the 7 Years' War occurs largely in part of expansion of global trade networks and land claims, and North America is going to give a prime example of the conflict that is associated with competing companies and countries. Now, where does it start? That's the million-dollar question. Around the 1750s, the British and French engaged in armed conflicts over disputed trading areas. And so if we take a look at this map right here, you can see this area is disputed between Great Britain and France. It's going to be the Ohio Valley. And eventually, what's going to happen is Britain will declare war on France in about 1756, which marks the start of the 7 Years' War. Now, the British wanted to expand for greater trade, which meant greater wealth. All right, Native Americans fought on both sides, but were more likely to support the French, and a lot of this has to do with a French presence before this conflict, through trading outposts and fur traders and stuff like that. In addition, a lot of missionaries would take the time to kind of learn about Native American culture in order to convert them eventually to Catholicism or whatnot. So that's why they were had a little more favor towards the French. Battles in the Caribbean over sugar colonies, primarily the British and French, obviously. This is where Spain kind of gets drawn into the conflict. So again, I want you to pause this and take a look at this, but this is going to show France in America. And so we can see, like we showed you in an earlier map, just the different forts and just the presence that France had within the North American continent. compared to the British presence and the Spanish presence. Now, in Canada, there was a lot of French success early on. They had more manpower, more forts, so on and so forth. But later, the British is going to progressively have a little more success. More money is going to flow in, soldiers are allotted, power of the Royal Navy is going to pick up, and so by about 1759, New France is really going to struggle with the British military presence on the North American continent. Now, the Treaty of Paris happens in 1763, and this is where the fighting finally stops. Now, the implications of this is that France is going to lose. All right, they're going to lose the majority of their, or almost all of their North American territories. The British are going to get Canada. They're going to get lands east of the Mississippi. The Spanish are going to get Florida and the lands west of the Mississippi. So essentially, what France still has are just some small islands in the northeast, but also maybe some small islands in the Caribbean, Haiti, Guadeloupe, and so on and so forth. Now, through this acquisition, the British are going to gain a lot of territory, and the British North America is going to expand substantially. So as we take a look at this map, this is pre-war boundaries in 1754, and again you can see the French presence on North America. All right, but following this in 1763 at the Treaty of Paris, you can see the British territory and how large that is. Now I'll go into a little bit why Spain gained so much land here with France out of the picture in North America. Now, the French ceded control to Spain in 1762. So if you take a look here, all right, you have the British claims, but here is the Spanish claims right there. And the reason why is that the French wanted to prevent losing the colony to the British. So the king at that time gave land to his cousin, King Carlos II of Spain. And so the last thing that the French wanted, because they have a historic rivalry with the British, is to give this huge chunk of land over to their primary rival. So this was a way to kind of reduce the British presence and kind of the wealth that would come with acquisition of these lands west of the Mississippi. Now, if you're any student of history, you know that eventually France is going to get these lands back. So the question is, how? Now, eventually that's going to come with our old friend Napoleon Bonaparte. So by the end of the 18th century, he was looking to expand French influence, and he wanted to increase his empire. And so he had a secret treaty that was developed, and what this treaty did is it was a trade of land and power between France and Spain. So Spain gets kind of the power over Tuscany in the European realm, where the French get the Louisiana territory back. Now eventually we know through history that the French are going to struggle again towards the end of Napoleon's reign, and so they will eventually take this huge chunk of land and they're going to sell it to this confederation of states after a while, okay? Because again, they want to strengthen the cause that's going on here instead of allow the British to have control or influence in that region. So ultimately, in a nutshell, the results of the war effectively ended French influence in North America. England gained a huge amount of land and strengthened its hold on the continent, and relations between the English and the Native Americans were significantly diminished. And this is going to lay the foundation for what will become the American Revolution. Because even though Britain wins the war, they're going to be broke, and they're going to have to use extremely high taxes to gain back some of the money lost in this conflict. And the way they're going to do that is they are going to take their American colonies and tax them without representation, and the colonists are not going to stand for that. Thanks for tuning in.